Thank you very much, Michelle. Hello, everybody. My name is Ivor D. I am a recovered alcoholic, and I am zooming in from East Kilbride, just outside Glasgow in the west of Scotland. It is now 9 minutes past 1 in the morning here. I'm not sure if that means I've been restored to sanity. I'll let you be the judge of that over the next hour and a half. I'd like to thank you, Michelle, for introducing me, and I'd like to thank Ali and Calvin and Teresa and Nathan and Marion. Beautifully read Spiritual Appendix number 2. Thank you so much. And hats off to the group. You know, great to see the group is still very much thriving. It was 18 months ago that I was here last, and I'm very honoured to be invited back. You know, you've had 78 speakers in the interim, and great to be back. And I do apologise for anybody that heard me on that occasion, because I didn't realise until after I agreed with Ali to come back that I've picked the same topic. But it's very, very dear to my heart, an unshakable foundation for life. And that comes from the 12 and 12, and I'll come back to that in a wee minute. But a few words of introduction, first of all. My sobriety day is July the 21st, 1984. That is when I was separated from alcohol. But that's not when I embarked upon a spiritual journey, as I'll share a little bit of. And I don't know, with 131 people in the room, there's a fair chance that there's some newcomers, there's some people who are just coming around, there's maybe some people who are really struggling in sobriety. So I want to say to all of you, welcome. Welcome. You know, if you know that you've got a problem with your drinking, then you're in the right place. If you know after a long time away from a drink that you've got a problem with living sober, you're in the right place. So a warm welcome to you. I'll apologise in advance for 2 reasons. In this Zoom era, over the last almost 3 years, I've been told that I've got an accent. I don't really understand that, but I'll try and modulate it so that my friends across the pond can understand me. The other apology in advance is that I've had a cold or something, and my throat just catches me occasionally. So if I have to break off to drink some water, or I disappear into a coughing fit, I apologise in advance. It's really, really good to be here. Good to see a few of my fellow group members. My home group, put the details into the chat before the chat was disabled. It's a group called Towards Emotional Sobriety. We meet on a Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock UK time. That's 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. The details are in the chat, as is my phone number and my full name. I also do service in 2 other meetings, and they're in there as well. Really, really good to be here. And, you know, it's fantastic to think that this group has been going for almost 3 years, if I'm right. You know, obviously there's a fantastic cross-section of the world in the squares, you know. Bill Wilson could not have imagined the meanings of the words when he wrote in 1939. We are people who normally would not mix. Couldn't have imagined that in the 21st century, as a response to COVID, the Alcoholics Anonymous across the globe would come together and continue to come together after almost 3 years, you know. And just at the outset, let me say that for all the years that I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous and away from Alcoholics Anonymous, but sober all of that time, the last almost 3 years, thanks to Zoom, has been the most transformative period in all my journey. I have learned more about the spiritual program. I've been able to apply the spiritual program. I've been able to pass on the message of hope and recovery to more people than at any point in my journey. It's been absolutely wonderful. It's given me that unshakable foundation for life that I've chosen as the topic for today. So I wanted to say that at the outset. And I want to pose a question. I know that there's a question and answer session after all, which I'm quite anxious about, frankly, right? I don't know what you're going to hit me with, but let me pose you all a question. Who here would not want an unshakable foundation for life? And that's what's on offer. That's what we've got available to us for fun and for free. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. And we've got an unshakable foundation for life if we follow what is laid out in the big book, first of all, supplemented, of course, by the 12 and 12 and all the other wonderful books that have been published in the intervening years by AA World Services, you know. But I want to talk about the previous false unshakable foundations for life that I had. And I'm going to tell you a wee bit about my background to qualify myself. I only drank for 9 years. I started at the age of 16 and I finished at the age of 25. When I discovered alcohol at the age of 16, I really thought I had just discovered my foundation for life. I loved the effect that alcohol had on me. It transformed me. You know, Michelle referred to my love for Marvel comics, and you'll see my friend, the Incredible Hulk, up behind me. I had been a lover of Marvel comics since I was 8 years old. I loved the idea of superpowered human beings, whether it was Peter Parker as Spider-Man or whether it was the Hulk being turned into this raging behemoth. And with alcohol, when I discovered alcohol at the age of 16, I just discovered my superpower. I loved the effect. Didn't like the taste. Did not like the taste. And there were very few drinks in my 9 years that I actually enjoyed, if truth be told, but I loved the effect. And I thought, by turning my will and my life over to the care of this stuff that came in cans and bottles, I was made. I was going to show the world who Ivor Davismore really was. But you see, it was a facade. It was an illusion. It was a lie. And 9 years later, when it had stopped working for about 4 or 5 years previously, it nearly killed me. This stuff that I loved, and I loved the effect, it nearly killed me. Either side of my 25th birthday, my life could have ended, maybe should have ended, with a little byline in my local newspaper: 25-year-old man found dead in flat fire, no suspicious circumstances. That could have been me. And I'm only here today thanks to the grace of God, because, you know, long before I had any conception of God, far less a conscious contact or any kind of relationship, a power greater than me intervened in my life and saved me from dying at the age of 25. But then I thought my problem was drinking, therefore my solution was just not to drink. And I found that quite easy, and I'll tell you why in a wee minute. But first and foremost, I only managed to stay away from one drink for one day at a time because of the intervention of a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, a lovely wee man called Matt, who lived near me in Alexandria in the west of Scotland. And this man had 12-stepped me week after week after week. I thought he was a very sad and lonely wee man that he only had me to talk to. But he was planting seeds that I needed to cultivate at the age of 25. I needed to not drink one day at a time. And the reason why it was easy after my last drunk in July 1984, again, was due to the intervention of a power greater than me. You see, I was so desperate when I came to covered in blood with a thumping headache, in the shower of the wee hotel room that I was in Crete in the Mediterranean. I cried out to something. It wasn't a formal prayer, but I cried out to something. And that something responded, and that's something I believe firmly was my power, was my God, as I call him, even though I'm not a religious person at all. And I was saved from dying, and I don't say that lightly. I was saved from dying, but for a long, long time, I didn't understand why. And I'll come back to that. Being physically sober, I threw myself into life. You know, Bill Wilson talks at the bottom of his page 1 of his story that he imagined himself at the head of vast enterprises. And for a while, I was at the head of a vast enterprise, a self-made enterprise. I threw myself into a job that I loved, and suddenly I'm at the head of a small empire of 1,500 employees, and I'm managing a budget of several £1 million back in the 1980s and the 1990s. And it very, very quickly just became like a huge weight around my neck, an albatross. The Marvel Comics reference again, back in the 70s, there was an advert for a bodybuilding program featuring a cartoon Charles Atlas, literally with the world on his shoulders. And that was me. That was how I became. But you see, I thought that succeeding in business, making lots of money, that was my unshakable foundation for life. I thought, again, I was wrong. I was wrong. I didn't have any other power other than my own self-will, my own self-knowledge, self-propulsion. You know, I drove myself almost completely mad. My story is that I'm in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't embrace this program of recovery. I just stayed abstinent from alcohol. The only way I was able to do that, as I said, was because of the intervention of God. I never once thought about a drink, and that in itself is miraculous. I've drifted away from AA for over 8 years to pursue a new business venture, funnily enough, reacquainting myself with my Marvel Comics characters, and I set up a business, and this was the egomaniac in me. I was going to show all you Americans how to retail comic books from a little warehouse in Scotland. right? You can see how well thought out that business plan was, designed in the back of a cigarette packet. But nevertheless, it seemed a good idea at the time. And also, I needed to get away from a job that by this time I absolutely hated. I didn't mean to stop coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. I never fell out with AA. I never took a resentment to anybody or to the fellowship in total. But you see, at that time, I didn't have any roots. I didn't have any higher power. I didn't have any sponsor. I didn't have a home group. I didn't have a program. And I just drifted away from AA. And when I talk about this part of my life, it really does feel now that I'm talking about somebody else's life. It doesn't feel like me at all, you know, because my life has been so transformed in recent years. Nevertheless, that's what happened. I drifted away from AA for over 8 years. And I would not wish the experience that I had on my worst enemy. But I'll tell you what, I'm grateful for it today, because in those 8 years away from AA, no program, no power, no nothing, I learned more about the illness of alcoholism than I could possibly have learned by just going to meetings for those 8 years. What I mean by that is that when I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous in 2003, 19 years and 2 months absent from alcohol, I'm desperate. I'm sick of what I call crap sobriety. I don't have any sobriety that anybody would find attractive. I can barely string sentences together. My marriage is broken up. My wife didn't use these words, but later on, when I did go through the program, I realized that I was an extreme example of self-will run riot. That's basically what she said to me. But Ivor certainly did not think so, let me tell you. I had a strained relationship with my children. They've never seen me drink. God willing, they never will. They're now, you know, all in their 30s. But they saw my friend the Hulk come out, you know, just because my daughter wouldn't get up quick enough to help me spoon out a takeaway dinner one night, I just put my foot right through a door. Imagine these 3 kids watching their dad going completely rage, as we call it in Scotland, going completely mad, putting his foot through a door. And I'm sober. This is me sober. Start raving sober. You know, that was me. And I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous in 2003 at the suggestion of a counsellor out with Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, a woman that was put in my path by God, literally an angel of God. And this woman nursed me back to sufficient mental health after the breakup of my marriage to enable me to make semi-sensible decisions. And one of the best decisions I made at that time was to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't really know what to expect or what to say to you all. I'm 19 years and 2 months away from drink. And I'm coming in the doors and I'm just baffled and beaten and bewildered. Everything in my life that I held dear is disintegrated. My marriage is over. I've got a strained relationship with these children. The business that I set up in 1995, all that I'm doing is getting deeper and deeper into debt. I'm really, really good at customer service. And see, if you wanted to know who the writer and the artist was on Amazing Fantasy 15 or Incredible Hulk #1, I'm your man. But see, actually running a business, I could not make a living. And later on, when I was directed to the big book and I dusted it down and I began to read it voraciously for the first time in years, I got to page 52 of the bedevilments. And at that point, I'm thinking, there's got to be something more wrong with me than just alcoholism. I'm not minimizing alcoholism, but my head was telling me that I must have some other mental illness. In fact, I was so conceited that I believed that I had an undiagnosed mental illness. And if only I could just find some psychotherapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist and sit down with him, he would be able to diagnose me. He'd give me a course of treatment and drugs, and he would go away and write an article for the UK medical journal, The Lancet, and become famous. But I would be sorted. This was the delusion that I was labouring under. But when I read my big book voraciously from the beginning, and I'll come back to that in a minute, when I got to page 52, there's a paragraph in page 52 that described me exactly in 2003. In fact, it described me for the several years previously. And it's a paragraph that many of you will be familiar with. It's called The Bedevilments. You know, I could not control my emotional nature. I felt useless. I was unhappy. I could not seem to be of real help to other people. And I certainly could not make a living. It was like a checklist for me over 19 years. This is me, untreated alcoholism. What is the solution? Fortunately, Bill Wilson spoke to me from beyond the grave, because in that foreword to the first edition, he writes that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we did it is the main purpose of this book. And I so wanted to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind. Drinking's not a problem. It's gone. I don't have any issues with drinking. But I am demented in sobriety. I so want to recover. And I'm coming back to meetings in Glasgow, and I'm meeting people who are just days, weeks, months, or just a few years sober, and they've got what I want. And I'm thinking that they're looking at me and thinking that I should have all this sus. You know, that Ivor's over 19 years away from drink. He must have all this sorted. And I'm absolutely demented. I'm miserable and depressed. I'm very, very lonely. So I threw myself into the programme. And of course, you get to step 3, and the route to step 3 is by reading through chapter 4, We Agnostics, first of all. And I had a real problem with the God word. I thought that I'd turned my back on God. I had turned my back on the God that I was brought up with when I was about 14. So even saying the Serenity Prayer at the end of meetings, I still didn't feel entirely comfortable. I still bristled with it. I thought I was an atheist. And for many years, I had looked for the militant atheist wing of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I still never found it. But when I read We Agnostics and Bill Wilson's beautiful words, I realised I'm an agnostic. And therefore, there's a whole chapter dedicated to me. And when Bill writes in that chapter that we emphatically assure you, Ivor, that you're on your way, if you're willing to believe that there's a power greater than you, or you're even willing to believe that there might be a power greater than you, then you're definitely on your way. And I could subscribe to that because, like Bill, often I would look at a starlit night and go, who then made all this, you know? But it was a fleeting feeling and it was lost. So I came to believe in step 2, at like 19, 20 years away from a drink, that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And in fact, it had restored me to sanity with regards to the first drink all those years ago, but I hadn't realised it. But I now need restored to sanity in a much more general sense. I need to be restored to sanity in the sense of Albert Einstein's definition, where he talks about the definition of insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. And that was certainly my experience with drinking. But I'll tell you, in my sober life up until this point, I was doing the same thing over and over again in business, with money, in relationships, and it was just all falling apart. I had the reverse King Midas touch. Many of you will know the story of King Midas. Everything he touched turned to gold. I don't need to spell it out what everything I touched turned to, do I? You know, it begins with an S, just in case anybody needs a clue. And I'm miserable. So I approached step 3 with some hope then, as well as some trepidation. And I have to tell you, you know, this meeting's focuses on step 11, and I will get to the topic. But step 3 was the biggest decision of my life, because at the stage where I took it, I'm willing to do anything and everything that Alcoholics Anonymous now suggests, because I'm beginning to feel better. Even though I've just been back for a few months, I'm beginning to feel lighter. I'm beginning to feel that maybe my counsellor who directed me back to AA was right when she said that she thought that I would benefit from it and that I could possibly help people. You know, people are beginning to come up to me and say, Ivor, I've never heard anybody talk about being so miserable and depressed away from AA. I've never heard anybody talking about untreated alcoholism the way that you do. Could I maybe go for a coffee with you? And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm not the only one. So I approached step 3 and I made that decision to turn my will and my life, my thoughts and my actions over to the care of a power that I cannot see, smell, hear or touch. But I can see the examples in skin of all the people that I've met in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can't explain the miracles that I'm meeting. There's one man locally here in East Kilbride. The first time I met him, I went, oh, mate, you've left this too late, you know, because he was yellow, his stomach was distended. And that man today is 18, 19 years sober and is a great example of Alcoholics Anonymous and a fine figure of a man, you know. And he was given the last rites. But of course, related to step 3, when you make your decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, then you have to do some things to actually communicate with this power. And the first thing was pray. First thing was prayer. And I have no idea how to pray. I have no idea. I remember doing simple prayers as a wee boy, literally kneeling down at my bed at night, you know, God bless mommy, God bless daddy, God bless granny, God, you know, that was my previous prayer experience. And then, of course, we had the Lord's Prayer drummed into us at school. And I went to meetings around Glasgow, and I met this man called Augustine. And Augustine was a Roman Catholic priest, but more importantly, he was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous with about 38 years behind him. And one night I heard him share that for all his training in the seminary and for all his training, for all his experience as a priest, the most important prayers he had learned were in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm sitting at the edge of my seat. I'm waiting on the answer. What is it he's going to say? And he just said, the most important prayers that I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous are just to say, please and thank you. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, is that it? Is that really it? And I thought, well, if a Roman Catholic priest is telling me that that's an effective prayer, then I can do that. I'll try that. So I kind of developed that into please help me and thank you for the day. Thank you for my sobriety. Thank you for my life. And later on, I began to build upon that prayer life. And, you know, like it says in the book, thy will be done. Thy will be done. I stopped praying for answers to my problems, and I began to ask for knowledge of his will for me. So I went through the action steps after step 3 and decided in step 3 that I'm going to do everything Alcoholics Anonymous suggests. And I get through 6 and 7, and I'm amazed to find over and above a physical allergy to alcohol that has long since been deactivated because I'm no longer ingesting the stuff, that my main problem was selfishness and self-centeredness. That is the root of my troubles. Learn that. It's in the big book, page 62. And I still wrestled with, well, what's God's will? What's Ivor's will and what's God's will? And I took a kind of scientific approach to it because that's the kind of mind I have. And I thought, well, if selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my troubles, then wherever this God is, it must be the opposite of that. So if I do selfless things, if I be kind, if I be caring, if I be compassionate, if I stop thinking about myself all the time, which was previously my default setting, then I must de facto gravitate towards God's will. And that's what I started to do. And don't get me wrong, I made many stupid mistakes along the way, believing that I knew what God's will was for me today. And I would go off on a tangent and make a complete mess or something. But over the period, the more I've practiced it, the more I have learned to tune in and to hone in, and to know when, what is God's will. And prayer and meditation, of course, are central to that. At the beginning of the 12 and 12, just before the passage that I've chosen my topic, right at the very beginning of step 11, the 12 and 12, it says prayer and meditation are our principal means of conscious contact with God. Boom. So I've got the prayer down to a fine art. I'm developing my prayer life, but meditation. And at first I thought, to meditate, you have to get a stool and you have to get incense sticks and you have to do it for 2 hours in the morning and maybe 2 hours at night. And I thought, I can't do that. But then I listened to, for example, Joe McQuaney, Joe as in Charlie and Joe. What I learned from Joe was that he spiritually prepared for the day with prayer and meditation and readings. But his attitude to it was a very simple one that I could adopt. He basically said to me was, just take as much time to spiritually prepare for the day as you do putting your clothes on, brushing your teeth, going to the bathroom, washing your face. And I thought, I can do that. So I began to just try quiet time. I began to just try and quieten myself down before I rushed off into the day. Sometimes I would listen to YouTube, for example, audios, guided meditations. Other times I would just sit quietly. And of course, by this time I've incorporated readings. I've gone from somebody who, like Dr. Silkworth says in Doctor's Opinion, came to scoff, and I'm now remaining to pray. And I'm doing readings. I'm reading the Daily Reflections. I'm reading an Al-Anon book because I went to Al-Anon for a brief period. That's a story for another day. And I'm reading a third sort of guided reflections reading. And they all help to just iron out the wrinkles in my head in the morning and just connect me with God. And then I get up to steps 10, 11, and 12, sometimes called the maintenance steps. Not for me. They're the growth steps. Step 10, Bill Wilson could not be much more specific because at the beginning of step 10, he says, we have entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for a lifetime. right? So I've entered the world of the spirit, and then there's some very clear mini instructions as to what to do, to make sure that you're not blocked off from the sunlight of the spirit by resentment, fear, selfishness, dishonesty, and then we move on to step 11. And, for many, many years, I just thought, okay, step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand him. Okay, so I pray in the morning, I meditate a bit, I read a bit, and then I just go out into my day. And it's taken me a long while and a long years of practice, and especially going back through this with sponsees. And by the way, I did not sponsor a single soul through this program until I was 24 years sober. Memo to everybody in the room who's less than 24 years sober, you do not need to wait this long. This is just my journey, right? But I'll tell you what, in the last 15 plus years now, since I started to try and carry this message to other alcoholics, it's taken my spiritual connection, my spiritual growth off to a completely different level. And the more and more that I go over the book with sponsees, the more is revealed to me, just like it's promised in the book. So I now know that in step 11 in the big book, there's very, very, very straightforward instructions. I mean, Bill Wilson even again spells this out on page 86. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. And he then outlines what to do when you retire at night, what to do on awakening. And then he outlines what you can do, as you go through the day. We pause when agitated. And I want to say at this stage that even at 38 and a half years plus sober, and even at many, many years on this spiritual journey since I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous after that 8-year hiatus, I'm still in a spiritual kindergarten. The amazing thing about prayer and meditation is that, meditation is our step out into the sunlight, right? But the amazing thing is that it can be constantly developed. I still feel like a novice, a beginner. And I'm excited on a daily basis about what God's will is for me on a daily basis. I'm excited to try and connect with that God in the morning and to go through my day. And when I look back, just like it says on page 100 of the big book, I can honestly say that what Bill wrote on page 100 of the big book has become my experience. When I look back, I realise that the things which have happened to me were far better than anything Ivor could have planned at any point in his journey. And that is incredible. It's one of the many, many, many instances in the big book of the promises of the program, written by a man under divine guidance at only 4 years sober, and it's become my experience. This crazy Scotsman, all these years later over in the west of Scotland, it's become my experience, absolutely incredible. So the topic that I chose comes from step 11 in the 12 and 12. Teresa referred to earlier on. And the full context says there is a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and benefit. But when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. And, I reread that just a few years ago, going through the 12 and 12 with a sponsee, and those words leapt off the page and hit me between the eyes because without me realising it, it had become my experience as well. I didn't get that. The self-examination is primarily what I have to do in step 10 because I'm not a saint. I still can suffer from resentment. I definitely suffer from fear, and I definitely can be selfish and dishonest. So step 10 for me is the self-examination bit. And then the prayer and meditation. And it's very easy sometimes for me to cut corners, just to maybe treat myself to a long lie. That's a lie-in. And maybe just skip my readings, maybe decide that I'm not going to sit quietly for a few minutes. I'm maybe going to, just say, hi, God, good morning, how you doing? And then just throw myself at the day. And it's me that suffers. It's me that suffers. And all I have to do is just, sit quietly for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour. I'm fortunate that I'm retired now from economic activity. So I've got no tremendous pressures on me in a day in the morning. But the more that I put into my prayer, my meditation, my quiet time, the greater that unshakable foundation for life becomes, And then see when you factor in step 12. Obviously, we're talking about step 11 here, but see when I add to self-examination, prayer, meditation, helping other alcoholics, being of service, whether it's been, sharing at a meeting or running or hosting or being of service in 3 meetings that I'm involved in on Zoom, or sponsoring people on a one-to-one basis, or just responding to 12-step calls, or all the myriad things that we, especially recovered alcoholics, are called to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. When you add that in, it really is not just an unshakable foundation for life, but it's an unshakable foundation for an abundant life, a life which, even with all that's going on in the world just now, and has been going on in the last 3 years, is a foundation for a joyous life. Bill Wilson talked about his experience in his own story, about the joy of living we really have, even under difficult circumstances. I'm paraphrasing, and that has become my experience. Because you know what? You don't get to be sober for 38 and a half years and not experience a lot of life, Life has been very lifey, as a friend of mine refers to. I've been through the lot. The only thing that hasn't happened is I haven't picked up a drink. Births, marriages, deaths, divorce. Almost 3 years ago, I had severe heart failure. I joked with the consultant when he diagnosed me after being in the hospital for 2 days, and he told me it was a category 4. And I quipped with him and I said, "What's a category 5?" And with a deadpan expression, he said, "A wooden box." And I thought, oh, right, I was quite serious then, okay. But you know what? Thanks to this program, even then, I did have some fear. I'm not going to claim that there was no fear. But even then, I thought, okay, well, the way things seem to work is that the more that I look after God's kids, the more that I stop thinking about myself, the more that I try and remember that I've got an unshakable foundation for life, and the more that I try and communicate with God and say, okay, God, here we go, another day, thy will be done, you steer, I'll pedal, the more that I try and help other alcoholics, he takes care of me. He, she, or it takes care of me. That's the way this seems to work. And here I am tonight, coming up in 2 o'clock in the morning, very, very grateful to do anything that is asked of me in Alcoholics Anonymous, to go to any lengths to carry this message, to share back what has been so freely given me. And I may have said this before, but it's my experience, especially in the last 19 years, my life has been transformed. It's not just improved, it has transformed beyond all recognition. And I now know that I was saved from dying at the age of 25 in 1984. But it took me a long number of years to find out why. I know why now, with absolute certainty. I was saved from dying, not just to be sober, not just to be the best version of Ivor that has walked this planet at the age of now almost 64, to be the best dad and now grandfather of 2 wee grandsons, but most importantly of all, to be Agent Davis, acting in directions from the principal, to carry this message to other alcoholics. And in the Zoom era, the ability to do that the world over has been in itself transformative, I dropped the baton. My first mentor was a wonderful man called Archie G. He was like Glasgow's equivalent of Clancy I. And this man helped me come into Alcoholics Anonymous back in the 1980s. But as I told you, I drifted away from AA in 1995, and within a couple of years, I heard on the grapevine that Archie had died. He passed the baton to me, but I dropped it. And when I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous in 2003, and I very quickly realised that the solution was in the programme and that I had been suffering from untreated alcoholism, as an expression of gratitude to the God that saved me in 1984, as an expression of gratitude to Archie and to all the other people that had helped me, even when I wasn't really listening, I decided to throw myself into this thing and do the absolute best that I possibly can. So you see, I could do this. I could do something like this every single night from now until the day that I'm called to the big meeting in the sky, and I still would not have repaid my debt to God and to Archie and to all the people that have carried the message to me. That's how strongly I feel about this. And, to see people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to have a host of friends, to see a fellowship grow up about you. Again, promises that Bill Wilson lays out at the beginning of chapter 7, they've become my experience. It's incredible what's on offer in this program if you follow the directions. And I can say that with some authority, I believe, from my own experience, because I didn't follow the directions for so many years. And the difference between my sobriety on my own terms, my own way, and following AA's design for living, it's like chalk and cheese, night and day. You know, there's no comparison, you know. Promises. Is that me getting a time warning? Okay, thank you. Promises. The paragraph that my topic comes from finishes off with a promise, which again has become my experience. It says, now and then we may be granted a glimpse of that ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom. And we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm will be secure for so long as we try, however falteringly, to find and do the will of our own Creator. And amazingly, I can report that has become my experience. And you know, the more that I apply prayer and meditation, the more glimpses I get. The more glimpses I get. I cannot describe my higher power to you or to anybody, but I experience God in my life every single day. The more that I seek and carry out God's will, the more that I serve this God that I've discovered in Alcoholics Anonymous, the more I get given a piece of the jigsaw puzzle of Ivor's life. It's like I'm working on a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, but there's no picture in the box. But the days where I'm connected, the days where I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, I get given a piece and I put it into the picture. And it's like, right, okay, that's what that means. That's what that means. And it all makes sense, you know. So many promises have come into my life, and it's all founded upon the decision that I took in step 3, and then being able to align my will with God's will in step 11. You know, Bill even says that in the big book. He says you can exercise your willpower and, you know, and along these lines as long as you want, as much as you want. It is the proper use of the will. And for a long, long time, I did not properly use my will. My main problem, in effect, was my misuse or abuse of my willpower. I've got a design for living today. You know, it's like I finally had to go back and read my own instructions from the manufacturer about how to use myself, how to apply myself in the world, you know. And I got a reset and a reboot, and I was wound up and I was sent out there, you know, to do what I was always supposed to do, you know. At the end of page 164 of our big book, there's another promise, which I used to think was a bit too gaudy. I used to think that Bill had got a wee bit carried away with his language, you know, because he, you know, once he was in the zone, he was very poetic with his use of language. No bad for a stockbroker, eh? And when he says to it, see to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and for countless others. In my experience, that's absolutely right. It has become the great fact for me. And central underpinning that is prayer and meditation. The only way that I can establish and maintain and develop a conscious contact with God. And another promise that I love, and I don't know if Patty's still in the room, but she says, you always say this, is at the top of, I think it's page 87 of the big book, it talks about what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. And I'll tell you, for a wee boy that loved superpowered human beings and loved Marvel comics, I love that. You know, it's like that is my vital sixth sense, to be able to use a part of my brain that was previously drowned in alcohol, right? Completely redundant, to be able to find a way through prayer, meditation, and helping others to actually find this intuitive sense that's on offer in this promise in our program to the benefit of others. It's just been absolutely wonderful. That's just about my time, so I'll be responsible and wrap it up there. Thanks again to Ali and the team, and to all of you in the squares for putting up with me and listening to me. And I'll try my best to answer your questions, but please just bear in mind it's 2 o'clock in the morning. So if I just brain freeze, you know, please excuse me. Okay, glad to be here, grateful to sober. Thank you.